I realized at this point that I'm just dancing to dance because I don't even need to intro dance. It's already connected, but it's just too much fun, so I do it because I'm me. So, friends, welcome back to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series. Today, we are going to be talking about something that you might think has nothing to do with your inner workings, but has everything to do with your inner workings, and that is food. And not only do we want to talk about food today, but we want to talk about food justice because there's a lot of distortion around our nutrition in the world at this point in time. So let's reclaim that. And we're going to have a deep, deep talk today. So, Red, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself. And today, I'd love for you to specifically speak to anything that you have that's knowledge or experience working with food or anything of that nature.
Thank you so much, Safrianna. I love doing these conversations because I just know the power of our work moving out into the world. And my name is Red MoonEagle. I'm a psychic catalyst, I'm a teacher, and I'm a healer. And food is a cornerstone of self-care. And I talk about it all the time in relation to the medicine wheel. I talk about it in relation to when I teach. And I've been teased about my relationship with food my entire life. I go out into the world and I get teased, you're such a granola, you're such a goody two shoes, and it's not because I'm a picky eater. It's because I care about the vibration of what I'm going to put in my body because I know that it's so important. And my grandma got teased. She was always big into nutrition. She taught me a lot about it. It was reinforced over and over and over in my life about how important food is. My dad was definitely a foodie. And I mean foodie like try a thing, try a thing, try a thing, try a thing. And there's a story about when I was a child and my dad took me out to a restaurant and they had the plates out of like the cold stuff like your chopped up onions and your pickles and all the things, and they handed me an onion and I like ate it, and the woman at the table next to my dad was like, "Ah, oh, how horrible, you're torturing your child." And he goes, "Try taking it away from her." So I have always understood, even as a child, and it was reinforced over and over again, how important food is and the difference between food like substances and real food, and our connection to food in our world and how that food connects us to each other.
Oh my gosh, we're coming back to that topic for sure today, that food like substances, because that is so important to talk about. But thank you for that. And oh, this is going to be such a good one today. In case you don't know me, I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I'm a licensed professional counselor. And as a part of that study, I also started to study integrative medicine. So I was actually going to get a certification and like go all the way and do the doctor. And then I was like, no, we're not doing that. So I have the education and background to really understand some of these nitty gritty things, and then the spiritual background. So I have been a practicing druid since I was 18, and druidry really cares about the quality and the energy in our food. So it's always been something important to me. I started seeing my first nutritionist, who was actually an herbalist, when I
Mm.
was 23, and she was all about whole foods and pairing things with herbs and spices.
Hmm.
And so I really got a pretty early, like, holistic view of food from her. And that really kicked off me getting curious. And so since then, I've studied some of Ayurveda, which is our digestive
Yeah.
constitution, as
Hmm.
well as I have personally tried so many different food styles of eating. I have been on the fully pre-packaged food-like substance train. I have been on the paleo. I have been on the keto. I've been on the full vegan. I've been on the vegetarian. And now I've landed firmly in a whole foods vegetarian camp. So I have lots of experience across different diets, and so
Hmm.
I can kind of speak to some of those different things too. So we're going to be bringing all of that to the table today as we navigate this.
Yes.
So I just want to start with the famous phrase, you are what you eat.
Mm.
Because I remember hearing this when I was younger and I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then as my brain kind of took in the bigger picture, I was like, oh,
Mm.
what goes in builds the building blocks that
Mm-hmm.
maintains the body.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I literally am what I eat.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what your feelings on that statement are.
Well, it's interesting. I don't even really remember the first time I heard it, but I know I was older. I must have been a teenager, I think, because I had a similar like that doesn't make sense and yet it makes complete sense, but it was the context in which it was delivered that I think confused me. Because when I think of looking at food, for me, it's a combination of both nutrition, minerals, and life essence. There's this understanding in my world that's been there my whole life, which is the interconnectedness of how we are connected to this 3D existence through our, and I say it jokingly and not, our human meat suit, right? This is the shell we live in. We as a soul, as an entity, could be from here or not from here. There's too many variations. But our meat suit doesn't interface well if it's not given the building blocks, the things that it needs to function well. But there's also an honoring of the interconnection. So when I think of food and I think of you are what you eat, it kind of makes sense, but there's a disconnection often in the delivery of that statement, which is the not just the nutritional things that your body needs, but the energetic and connected pieces of what you have eaten and where does it come from and who was the interaction, the intermediary between you and that food, and was the where the food came from, was that honored in a sacred way, was that acknowledged, was that entity of the plant acknowledged. I know that sounds way weird to some people, but there's so much validity in that statement that if you're a person who energetically or even emotionally can pick up the subtleties of what food may or may not be, or food like substance, which doesn't feel right, then even though you're taking it in your body and you think you're eating, the thing that I've noticed the most of is that people that are sensitive to that, that end up eating because they need the energy, like their body needs the thing, they become more and more disconnected from what they're eating because it hurts.
Mm,
Energetically, it hurts. Emotionally, it hurts. Food is no longer pleasurable
yep.
in a connected reciprocity of peace and acknowledgement. It becomes painful. It becomes pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And they become more and more and more disconnected from what food is to their meat suit and to the vibrational awareness of who they are as an entity in that meat suit.
Yeah.
It can become very complex, but it's so simple to fix too, in my opinion. That's an opinion. I recognize
I
that.
mean, unless you have
Choices.
yes, choices, and there are some people who don't have choices. There are
That
some
is
people with
true.
extreme food allergies, right? Like
Yes.
there are certain foods that I'd love to eat avocados every now and then, and I
Hmm.
can't because I'm allergic to them, right? So,
Right.
but most of us have more choice in food than we would like to admit. There's also, of course, the energy of preparing food, and some of us are already so drained because compulsory
Right.
overwork and also just like we don't prioritize food as a thing that we should spend time on, right? Like it's almost
Well,
glorified
because
that you
it's
can grab and go.
right. It's glorified that you grab and go because you're also contributing to the capitalistic machine, right?
Yep.
And I wanna also acknowledge that living in a food desert does affect your ability to
Yep.
have good access to food. Living in poverty and not having access to real food because of those circumstances,
Right.
and the education, like foraging is not taught. How to grow your own food is not taught. Victory gardens are not a thing Like, I know about them because I love history and I study stuff, and my great grandma, my grandma, my granddad, like, all talk to me about them. But unless you know that's a thing, you don't know that's a thing. You don't
Yeah,
know what you don't know until you know you didn't know it. And food is wrapped up in
it
all
is.
of that.
And there's so much politics in food and that
Yep.
capitalism piece
Mm-hmm.
and so much has just been trying to make big corporations more money. I mean, look, there's so many things I want to say here that you have commented on because there's just food is like one of the most important things on the planet and we're just really mucking it up. But like the soybean industry, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's Monsanto, I think, is the big corporation. They've literally come in and made all these rules and regulations to where other farmers can now not grow their own types of soybeans because Monsanto owns the right to grow soybeans. How does that make any sense on any planet, right? Like the control over food, who can grow it, who can eat it, who can sell it, like all of this food politics is it's all for capitalistic gain and it doesn't keep people healthy. So it keeps that system of brokenness running and the fact that we then need to go back and buy more, right? I have definitely had periods in my life where I've had to eat on the go a lot. I ate a lot of fast
Mm-hmm.
food when I was a public school teacher. I ate a
Oh, yeah.
lot of fast food when I was a public school teacher because I needed a
You're not
quick
the only one.
calorie fix.
Yep.
Yeah, and that energy was matching the energy of the work and how the
Yep.
system was too. The whole system was just toxic and not
Mm-hmm.
quite healthy, right? And my body was matching that vibration and what I was putting in, and I was syncing with who I was around,
Yeah.
right? And that was
Absolutely.
that normalization. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do they do to keep us happy in public schools? They buy us donuts once in a while, or they do a pizza party, or they bring us sugar usually
Yep.
to keep us. Oh, we could go on about sugar for a while, but I want to leap back and tell a really quick story because you were sharing, and again, there's just so many important things to talk in about here. Um, that story about how food impacts us energetically because I'm very energy sensitive and empathic. We've talked about this whole series. And so I pick up on everything, literally
Oh, yeah.
everything. My
All the things.
nineness does that too. And my partners and I went, there's a cute little like downtown area, maybe 15 minutes from here. We went into town and we went to get boba teas. And I don't do that often because they're sugary and like, they've got the additives and stuff. But once in a while, I can totally handle it. And I was feeling
Yeah.
great that day. So I was like, I'll get a single bubble tea, no problem. We walked into the restaurant and there were some guests there that were being rude. And the server that was making the drinks was really angry.
Hmm.
And like he was irritated because these people were being rude. They were heckling him. They were taking, like, I think they had taken somebody's to go order. Like, and so he was trying to kick them out. Right. So we walk into this. And of course, I'm picking up on all of this, but I didn't make the connection of what was about to unfold. So I get my boba tea. I drink my boba tea. I drink this guy's anger in because he was still angry while I made the beverage. Right.
Oh. Hmm.
And so we get home and I had to go get this out.
Hmm.
And that was a really big moment of realization for me, even though I have all this nutrition knowledge and like I have the energy piece and the ritual, like I can still consume other people's energy when they put that into the food. And so it was like mind blown moment. And then also like I don't need it, so I'm not going there anymore. Like we don't need that. But that is, one of the things people say about Justin's food, my partner Justin, who is our home chef and retreat chef, is you can feel the love in his food because
Mm-hmm.
he
Yep.
pours that out. He pours it out from his two. He
Yep.
pours it out into his food, and then you eat it, and you're like, "Wow, I feel so rejuvenated."
Hmm.
And that's what
Yeah.
I'm used to now. So my body's very used to that loving food.
Yep.
But you can start to feel a difference when you're not eating food like that, like what the energetic difference is. So I've really had that fine-tuned experience now, and there
Mm-hmm.
really is something to the energy that is placed in the food when you get it.
Yeah.
So there's not only the preparation, but then there's also where it comes from. So I notice a difference, and I drive Justin crazy because he's like, this thing is ripe in the garden. I want to pluck it. And I'm like, we are not plucking that till we're cooking it. Like I try to make that happen because that's when the
Oh my
Nuivra
goodness.
or the life force energy is
Is
the
the
most
strongest.
potent. Yeah. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, we're going to pluck it when we're cooking it because that's when
Yep.
it's optimum. And I notice a difference with that too versus stuff that we
Yep.
get from the store. What
Yep.
are the supply chains? Going
Yep.
to this guy at the restaurant who makes my boba tea who's angry, right? What about people who are out there picking your crops who are
Mm-hmm.
in potential slave labor conditions?
Yes.
What's happening
100%.
in the energy there? And I know that that's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, what do we even do about this? It's so big. But we can start to make it better.
Yes. And I'm going to go back to go forward because
Yeah.
I love this. Um,
Watch two
so,
ADHDers have a conversation.
right. Dun, 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 dun. So one of the things that I learned, so I grew up, my dad is a cooker, right? Like he cooks, he's a foodie, and everything he makes is perfect. And my grandma was not a very good cook. Like the poor lady really struggled. Like hamburger patties were a hockey puck when she got done. Like she boiled everything. It just had to do with like how she grew up cooking as a very young teenager wife. She didn't, and she married really young. So there's like a layers of trauma and other things in there, right? And so I had a really good experience with one and maybe not so much another. And then I had a lot of deep Southern rich cooking, great grandma experience. And so I knew there was emotion in food in the sense that I couldn't feel the emotion like empaths do, but I could definitely feel the energy, right? Like I could totally tell there was a thing there. Well, Taliesin is my youngest son, and when he was little, I had a very much like your experience with the boba tea, only it was kind of like Taliesin letting me know there's something wrong. Like I was really struggling with something I was teaching, and I was going through a big thingy. You and I have that commonality of being teachers, but where in the schools that I taught, they wanted all the teachers to eat the cafeteria food, and I was like, that's disgusting, and there's no way I'm going to do that. Like I couldn't, I wouldn't. My body was just like, nope. So I had made something for Taliesin, and I was upset and I was angry, and I put it in front of him, and he goes, yucky. And I'm like, but you like that thing? And he goes, yucky. And he was very young, and Thor was eating, but he was like, yeah, mom, it's not great, like. And I was like, you both love this dish. I don't understand. And it was that simple 2.5, 3 year old phrase of it tastes sad because he's empathetic, right? And I went, oh. And so I taught this to my kids really early. I don't know if they're using it as adults, but I taught it to them when they were children, which is okay. Well, let's fix the sad food. And we put pushed all of our plates in the middle of the table, and we held hands and we prayed. A simple little thing. We said thank you to the food where it came from. We said thank you for that we have the food, and thank you for having a home. And like we did the thank you thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
and we said together, like we're gonna each give a little bit of love to the thank you. And then we went back to eating, and Taliesin goes, yeah, it's fixed. Like
Cutie.
out of the mouth, as they say, the words out of the mouth of the children, or something. There's a
Right.
phrase there
Out of the
somewhere,
mouth of
but
babes.
thank you. And there is a quality of how food in our relationship with food and how we make food does matter where we are energetically, emotionally in our own bodies. I remember my grandma telling me you shouldn't cook when you're angry, but she never really backed that up with anything. So it didn't, I mean, I kind of knew it. It was a rule. Well, no, it was a rule I tried to follow, but it had never really anchored in an experience that brought it forward. And that little experience with Taliesin and Thor at the table will never leave me. Like I am so hyper aware of when I go to somebody's house and they're like, hey, would you like something to eat? And I'm like, no, thank you. Not only because I'm not entirely certain what I'm going to get, maybe, but also because people are not aware of what it is they're imbuing into the food. Like if you're
Right.
bitching and it, excuse the phrase, but if you're bitching and moaning about your boss and I'm at your house and we're just socializing as friends, I'm not going to eat your food. Not because I don't like you as my friend, but you're bitching and moaning about your boss. And I don't really want to take that in my body, even though I'm not empathetic. But energetically, I want to be aware of what I'm putting in my body, not paranoid. And I really want to, because you can go sideways with food really easily
Yeah.
because there is such a toxic paradigm around food in our culture. And it's not just the energy you're putting into the food when you're preparing it and how you're putting it in your body. It is also the reciprocity of recognition of where it comes from and honoring that process. And it is a huge topic. How do you know where your avocados are come from? Because apparently there's like a cartel of avocados now. I'm like,
Yeah, there
fascinating.
is.
Or like, where does your rice come from? Is it plastic? Is it real rice? You know, we have a lot of food. I think it's food. What, there's a fancy phrase that's like fake food. Like there's weird stuff happening in our food chains, right? Because it is so corrupt in this capitalistic money making process. You talked about the soybeans. Well, there's also like um, you can own a seed if you've genetically modified it, but you can't own an heirloom seed because it's like owning your genes, right?
Right.
Like,
Belongs to Mother Earth.
right. So our dialogue around food really comes from the history of, I mean, there's always been food. What's the word I'm looking for? It's where they manipulate. Like in the Victorian era, they would add
Genetically modified
sawdust.
organisms.
No, they would add
No.
like sawdust or plaster of Paris to
Fillers.
bread to fillers. Oh, there's another word I'm looking for. Anyway, it'll come or it won't. So during the Industrial Revolution in Europe, there was a lot of food manipulation going on because they were stretching, right, supply, and also adulteration. There we go. I knew the word was coming. Food adulteration really became big in the industrial era, at the early parts of the industrial era. If you've ever read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, that'll give you a whole different idea of food adulteration and the traumas around industrial food production. And in the United States, we carried that industrial Victorian modality into our modern food production. I don't think intentionally to corrupt our food source. I think it just happens. It just happens gradually. And post World War, I can't remember, it was World War I or World War II, that was the introduction of commissaries in the military. And then that became mainstream from the military industrial process after the World Wars. So we went from most people, yeah, we've always had grocery stores. They've been around for eons and eons and eons. You call them the corner market. Like if you go to Europe and you go to Germany, like you have a Metzgerei, which is a meat place. You have a Bäckerei, you have a bread place. You have an apothecary, which is your herbal place, and you might get your prescriptions there. They have very specialized stores in these little villages, and that's the way it was very much even in parts of the United States and all over the world for eons. But the introduction of that commissary system introduced mass markets, like supermarkets, like food markets. It really brought us the, I mean, you can look at the wonderful YouTube videos where they're bringing up some of the old like advertising from the 40s and the 50s about, oh, look at the wonders of the modern world. You can go and get canned food, eat all this canned food, because then you don't have to, it makes it easier. You don't have to can yourself. What this wonderful invention of the modern housewife. It makes your life easier if you buy canned food and prepackaged this. And heavily marketed because people were suspicious. Like, I don't know if I want to buy a can of beans. I think I can go down to the local like farmers group, and I can grow in my victory garden. I can grow fresh vegetables, and I know that's going to be good for my family and feed my kids, right? Like the paradigm shifted through psychological advertising, which there's a huge like Well,
So much.
psychology, like there's so much science in that. And as time has gone on, the women's movement, right? We're pushing women to stand up for themselves and be involved, which honestly, our modern capitalist movement took advantage of that. Like, oh, you want to be a modern woman, you want to go out and work in the work field, and you still want to have a house and kids because that's also what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do it all. So we're going to make your life easier. We're going to put your potatoes in a box. We're going to dehydrate and rehydrate instead of having a food. We're going to take all the substances of what food's made up of. We're going to separate it all out chemically, and then we're going to put it all back together to make a food-like substance. And we're going to tell you it's the exact same caloric and nutritional quality of the real thing. Because we're making you a modern woman. We're supporting your feminist rights by helping you feed your kids and do this easier so you can do all the things, right? Do you see how it slowly, insidiously became part of what we think a modern life should be?
Yeah.
And then look at all of the illnesses and all of the medical things that women have. Like they do fine for a little while and then their bodies fall apart. Well, or our kids are falling apart, or our kids have more problems, or, I mean, it just cascades. One fix further away from the medicine wheel, further away from our relationship to food. Consequently, it doesn't take a whole lot of rational scientific knowledge about how things work in the real world. I'm not talking conspiracy theory, because I throw conspiracy theories in the garbage where they belong. This is just regular, rational science tells me I need these nutritional qualities. I need to get that from my food. If you look at the separation of food-like substances, putting them back into a thing, and you feed it to people over long periods of time, and then you have a scientific outcome of X, Y, and Z, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's science. That is our scientific theoretical process being proven correct.
Well, and what's interesting here that I just feel the need to play a little devil's advocate on is that there was a lot of science that was funded.
Yes.
Especially around sugar and fat.
Yes.
And that's why I remember.
But it's also biased, right? They weren't taking in all of the pieces. You only took in what proved your point. And that's where conspiracy theory has to be thrown in the garbage with food, is like you have to go, okay, let's look at all of it. Let's really look at all of it and not, I'm questioning. I'm not going to swallow that you say beans are good for me. Okay, beans are good for me. Why? Why are beans good for me? What does my gut do with them? Is it a calorie? Is it a sugar? What does my body need from beans? We have the science.
Right. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because I remember growing up. So I grew up predominantly seeing commercials in the 90s. And that was the era of the low-fat yogurts. And
oh my God.
Everything was
margarine.
Margarine.
I can't believe it's not butter.
Food-like substance that exists, right? It's not even food-like anymore. It's so gross. But, there's this huge push of like, you're not supposed to eat fat, but then everything had a ton of sugar in it. And our bodies do worse on sugar. Fat is actually, like, healthy fats are required to transport the nutrition to the tissues of your body and your brain. So
it's your brain.
What did we do during that era of low fat? Like, what were people's, long-term health? And I look at my family and how we ate, and it was not good. And, that's another thing, like, because of there is a higher rate of poverty and food poverty, especially like access to good food is hard to come by. And I grew up in that. My meals, I either skipped meals, I didn't have breakfast often, I didn't have lunch often, and dinner was almost always something canned or pasta and red sauce. And that was almost all we could afford to eat. And so, of course, I had a resistance to pasta and red sauce. When I was older, I was like, keep it away from me. I never want to eat that again.
That's valid.
That is something that a lot of us go through too, is actual food poverty and just not having access to that food. So then we don't have education around it either. So then we're just trying to get by. And so I just want to circle back to that, like, no shame. If you're like,
no, there's no shame in any of this. No.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's how can you start to make those switches?
Well, it's interesting because when I was a young mom, so in my early 20s, and I was on food stamps, and I always had really good meals. And I was at the women's shelter at the town I was living in, and I was getting counseling for a traumatic event I had in my life. And I had Thor, because I hadn't had Taliesin at that point. I had Thor at the table, and he's like, "I'm hungry." I was like, "Oh, you want lunch?" And he goes, "Yeah." And so I opened up the dishes because I had it was an old lunchbox anyway, and I opened it up, and I had, let's see, I had fresh made bread that he had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on, where I had made a homemade jam spread thing. He had chopped up carrots and I think broccoli, and then I made a homemade ranch sauce because he was absolutely addicted to ranch, which I thought at the time was really disgusting, at least the bottled stuff. And he had an apple that I chopped up, and his grapes were cut in half because he insisted that he liked to eat them with a spoon. It's very strange. And then what else? There was, oh, he had a like a fruit bar. I'd made like a granola fruit bar thing. So everything he had in that lunchbox was fresh or made by me, basically. Other than the peanut butter. I didn't make the peanut butter. You can get that on the shelf, but I did buy the no sugar peanut butter, and that shit was expensive. But anyway,
yeah, that's a funny thing, isn't it, too?
Right. So there were a bunch of women there, and they were all like, I didn't even really notice it to begin with because we were all doing this like group discussion of women, and we all had our kids there, and it was all this trauma talking therapy thing.
Right.
And so I was not paying attention to other people's response to the food I was feeding my child. Not even remotely on my radar.
Yeah.
And at some point, I don't remember when, somebody like, "What are you feeding your kid?" And I went, "Food?" And she was like, "I thought you were on food stamps." And I went, "I am on food stamps." She goes, how much are you getting? I mean, I know it's kind of a weird question. And I gave her the amount. It was a really small amount. She was like, "You're getting like half of what I'm getting." And I went, "I don't understand where we're going with this." And it opened a discussion of how are you feeding your kid so well? Because she was a person who had grown up very wealthy, and their family had a thing happen, and she was on food stamps, and she was both ashamed of being on food stamps and also not understanding how I could feed my kiddo on food stamps so well. And I went, "Shopping?" I was very confused. And I know she was getting mad at me because I didn't understand where the conversation was going, because to me, it was just what you did.
Mm-hmm.
It led to me teaching a class at the women's shelter on how to shop for food stamps and shop well within a budget and how to cook from that. The group of women that I was with did not know how to make a loaf of bread. To me, that's something everybody should just know. Like, I just knew that. I didn't realize, I really didn't, I was very naive. I really didn't realize that people didn't know how to make bread.
Yeah.
I thought that was a thing that everybody should know. Everybody should know it. At some point, somebody in their life had taught them, and then maybe they just weren't doing it. I really did. I was so naive. Now I know better, and I'm aware of that. But we didn't have homemade bread because we were rich. We had homemade bread because it was cheaper to buy a 50-pound bag of wheat, grind it at home on the hand crank grinder, sift it, put the kernels back in, and grind it again. It was cheaper to do that than go buy a loaf of bread.
Right.
We were not rich. We were low middle class to the point of poor, depending on which person I was living with in my family at the time. Like dirt poor to low middle class poor, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know until I was in junior high that you could make macaroni and cheese from a box. I didn't know. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know they made that product because we bought whole cheese, whole milk. We did buy pasta, but we bought it in like a 50 freaking pound bag. Like if you didn't like macaroni, you didn't like pasta, because macaroni is what we could afford.
Right.
Like I would go to the store with my dad and we would look at all these different foods, but I would never really pay attention because he'd go, oh, that you don't want that. Look, I can show you how to make a thing. And I remember him making macaroni and cheese from scratch. So you can, even when you're poor, find ways to navigate how to eat well. But if you don't have the education to do it, you don't know how.
Right.
And that's big. That is so big.
We need more, I remember taking like one home ec class in school, and we cooked like cookies, and I don't remember, like nothing important to know how to cook for survival. But I had to teach myself to cook because I was caretaking younger siblings, and I didn't always feel good about the packaged TV dinners. Like they felt off to me. And now I'm very lucky because, like I said, Justin has only been cooking for 2 years now, actually, maybe 2.5 years, and has, taken some courses on how to cook specifically plant-based foods. And like, once you start to learn some techniques and you learn how to spice things, you can eat very cheap. And that's
Oh my gosh.
our budget for food is very low because we have bulk grains, we have bulk beans, we're lucky enough to be able to grow some limited crops in our yard this year, and those things make a difference. But all of this is new learning for him. Some of it's not new learning for me, but it's new learning for him. And then I'm like, you mean to tell me you didn't know this stuff too? So I really resonate with that. There's just such a lack of education around food, and it's really a major problem because, again, it's survival. Why are we not teaching people the basics of survival and how to sustain themselves?
Some of it's misinformation too, right? So like you were probably at the tail end of the home ec like curve, because the home ec that I had we actually did get nutrition. The problem with the nutrition in the home ec class that I had was they were already starting to tweak the fundamentals of nutrition around easy foods.
And the food pyramid.
Right, don't even get me started on that. Food pyramid and the food plate. I have things to say. I'm going to pull away from that. That's the thing. Makes me hot.
Seriously, it does.
But our nutrition was completely skewed around the food-like substances. And I remember having a conversation with my dad where I had come home and I was like asking questions, and he went, I don't know, but I think there's a quality of, you get inundated with that capitalistic hype about food-like substances that I don't think anybody's completely immune to it. I mean, I did too. I ate the low-fat yogurt and the margarine, and it did affect my health long term, even though everything else that I was cooking was real. And one of the things that happened to me is I got really, really sick. And when I got really, really sick, I chucked all food-like substances that I could get hold of, and I chucked it out of my diet. And it took a while, and I was still getting food-like substances. I still do. I completely cheat on chips because it's a texture thing, and I admit that. And I'm not going to be ashamed of it.
Yes, that's the thing.
And I'm not going to be ashamed of it.
Food, it's worse.
I am not going to be ashamed of that. If my body needs extra salt and I need texture, I'm going to add that in. But I do, and I am conscientious. And when I added butter back in, when I added full fat yogurt back in, when I added full cream back in, and I stopped feeling guilty about it, like my brain worked better. My ability to overcome toxic mold was better. My mast cell activation flares were so much less intense because I was then going back to my roots. I was really going back to the weirdo hippie granola that I am around food, and I am not apologetic about it because it matters.
It does.
And if I can teach that over and over and over again, I will die on this hill. I will die on this hill and be okay with it.
Yeah.
Because when people embrace it, they feel better. And when you feel better, you can connect in the world better, wholly, as a whole entity, connected and feel safe.
Yes.
And food is safety. So when you're
Food is
not food
safety.
safe, it impacts everything.
Yeah.
And there's I follow a couple people on YouTube and Facebook and social media that give me hope. They really do. They give me hope. Um, there's always the risk that somebody's going to go off into left field and join the purple Kool-Aid group, but at the same time, there's a validity in some of these people's work where they're taking poor neighborhoods and they're co-opting. They're taking a piece of an empty land plot and they're building a community garden, and they're teaching their neighbors how to teach their children how to eat real food, be safe with that. Um, and there's a lady, and I can never remember her name, but she does, like, she lives in New York City in a tiny little cubicle, and she grows food. She grows food in her cubicle. She's like, in New York City, oh my goodness, if the planes didn't come in every single day, that city would starve in 72 hours. Like, I mean, at least it would lose its mind anyway. But like, there's a quality of, there is a lot of food variety there because of all the different cultural influences in the intersectionality, right? But you can still live in New York City and not have access to real food because of the food-like substances that are everywhere.
There.
And I've lived in the South. A dollar store is on every damn corner, and a dollar store has food-like substances. There is no fresh material at a food dollar store. It
Right.
doesn't exist. And the amazement that I have about the South, just in the basic environment that you're living in the South, you have two growing seasons, and there are people that don't know how to grow food. And you can grow enough for two families in one summer, two families of four in one summer.
I mean, I believe it. We just started our garden in this yard, and we went very light on what we planted this year because we didn't have the money to
Just
get the,
starting.
to get a lot of
Yeah.
soil and beds
Yeah.
and whatever else we need. So we just did what we could. And
Hmm.
I mean, we had so many potatoes and so many beets and so many patty pan squash that we're like, I guess we're learning new recipes of how to use this stuff because
Yeah.
we're going to use it up. But yeah, Ike said in the comments, there's so much ignorance around the basics. We tried to complicate nutrition instead of listening to what our bodies need, and then that makes us not
Yep.
trust our intuition and interoception. And when we try to listen to and then we try to listen to the experts instead of our own bodies, and
Yeah.
that's so true. Like, there's unfortunate, government oversight in food, and it's like the oversight is not oversight that is doing less harm to the people or the animals. And that's what gets me is, and
Hmm.
I'm super passionate about this, so I want to speak a little bit to it, that I don't care if you eat meat or not. That is your
Hmm.
choice. But can you please aim to source meat from somewhere that's a small family farm? Yes, it's going to be more expensive, but if you're budget conscious, you wanna be eating plants anyway because 'cause they're way cheaper. Right? But, like, torture meat is not a thing that I wanna support, and I will never support. I was driving down the road, um, just the other day to go meet up with a friend, and I passed by veal containers. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, they're right here in my backyard. I had no idea." Of course they are, but,
Hmm.
veal containers are the little containers that those, cows have to stand
Hmm.
in and lay in, and they
Hmm.
have no room to move.
Mm-mm.
They're literally being tortured. They are in pain for
Yep.
pretty much 100% of your life, and then you're eating them. So what is
Yep.
that then doing to your energy and, like, your level
Right.
of depression, anxiety, pain, inflammation, right? And that does have an
Hmm.
impact. And I
Yeah.
can speak to that because I was a meat eater for a long time, and
Hmm.
when I was able to afford getting things from small farms, I felt a massive energetic difference.
Yep.
So
Yep.
again, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, doesn't matter. How do you source where you can food that
Hmm.
has a healthier energy for everybody involved? That's another thing that, a lot of vegans are about animal rights, but the meat industry is really cruel to a lot of humans too. The humans
Mm-hmm.
have a very extreme traumatic response to having to violently kill these animals. It's not pretty if you look into what the
Mm-mm.
conditions are. And so
Yeah.
humans are being psychologically traumatized. So even if you don't care about the animals, that's your right if you don't care. I can't change your mind on it. But do you care about the people, right? Because they're not
Right.
doing well getting you, especially pork. The pork industry
Yeah.
is the things they do there are just atrocious. So how do we build a more compassionate food system?
Yeah.
Because we have the means, and that's like
Mm-hmm.
the government control has convinced us that we don't have the means to make
Right.
this stuff happen.
We can't change it. It's too expensive.
It's too expensive.
Why would
Yeah,
you change it? It's too expensive.
right.
You'll put
Like
people out of jobs. Why would you do that?
all these
You're
stories.
hor- you're horrible. Why would you do that? Well, it's interesting because I can't help. I'm a history buff, so one of the things that people don't remember or know or understand is that back long time ago, Western Europe, right? Um, at one time, gout was a rich person's disease. And the reason that gout was a rich person's disease is the rich people were eating more meat and less vegetables because vegetables were a poor person's food. Now, when you come over to the colonial Americas and you start having a little bit more equitability, there's a little bit more of it's an interesting trend that changes, right? Where when you come over to the Americas, like you got to grow your own food. You got to figure out what you can grow because you're going to starve. And they did a lot of snare trapping. So there's a lot of lean meat foods that were in everybody's diet. And poor people in Europe also ate a lot of lean meat because the big fat rich meats, those are the ones the rich people ate. And since in many places in Europe it was illegal to kill a deer because that was a rich person's meat, you ate a lot of rabbit, squirrel, stuff like that, dove, birds, um, duck. I believe it was duck or swan, one of the two, or maybe it was both of them. And in England, you couldn't kill it because that was the king's bird. Um, but it those two birds also have actually a lot of fat in them. So if you look at historical medieval recipes, there are recipes that you have to insert fat from another animal to fatten the meat up to have enough fat to make it palatable to a rich person. Because, of course, most of the recipes we have are from rich people in the Middle Ages. But when we look at diets of regular people, just regular Joes from Western Europe coming over the Americas, they had a huge amount of vegetables and lean meats that they were naturally eating because they were snaring it. And they had to insert a lot of butters and creams and other things to basically juice it up a little bit, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to make it palatable. And there is a connection to how our bodies process meat because of eons of having been meat eaters and how it correlates to coronary artery disease in a large plethora of the population because our meats have a lot of fat genetically bred into them. And traditionally, especially European descendants, ate a lot of lean meat. And if you have Native American and some different kinds of indigenous ancestry, you need a certain amount of protein in your diet because your type of vegetables and your foraging looked different than European vegetable foraging and the type of meats we eat. So if you have a lot of white people ancestry, clearly myself, right? It behooves me to look at like rabbit, squirrel, dove, moose, deer, other kinds of leaner meats with more vegetables in my diet that have a more of a variety to keep my gut brain biome balanced. And if I eat heavy fat meats, I'm more likely to coronary artery disease, and heavy fat meats and genetically fattened birds and different kinds of meats and pork. Pork is, there's a reason that pork should be limited in so many ways, but I'm not going to go into that because you and I both know there's a whole thing there.
There's a whole
But
thing there.
there's a whole thing there. But if you're just looking at those things, it behooves you to look at, well, why am I being told that this is necessary and told it's okay not to eat my vegetables? Well, there's a capitalistic thing there. But what we know of how our glucose cycle works, with what we know about how our genetics play into how we digest food and how our body uses it and what that balance is, you can go back in history and look at, oh, gee, my heart disease didn't show up in my family until 4 generations ago.
Hmm.
Or it only emerged 2 generations ago. Or, you can really start looking at what we know about genetics, what we know about our ancestry, what we know about science and how food works. And it starts to make more sense as to, it would make more sense to, if I'm going to get meat, eat from somebody that's locally sourced. Or, I mean, I'm blessed and I know that. I know that I have privilege here. I can go to a meat shop. There's like 5 of them in the county. I can go to any one of them, and they always have deer, moose. They've got goat. Goat is an amazing meat source because it's lean. And most people, if they raise goats for meat, it's the local person that's growing it. You're not going to find very many goat mass farms because goats
Right.
don't respond well to that. They're kind of smart. Just FYI. Either really dumb or really smart, depending on how you talk to it. Um, sheep meat, or lamb, I guess I call it lamb. Some people don't like that. That's okay. Every meat has a flavor. There's a lot to it, but I'm blessed where I can get locally sourced meats that I know. I mean, I've been to all the butchers in the local area, and there's one butcher I prefer because energetically, when I walk in the door, I feel like there's an honoring process that's going on there.
Yep.
Like, he genuinely, like, I think he's empathic, so I feel like there's this like other quality that I'm picking up on, that he genuinely tries to do a good job. Where the other butcher shops, not like they're not trying to, but like energetically, I can just feel the difference, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a quality. And it's so funny. I was listening to him talk to another customer the other day. I went and picked up. I needed to get some liver because my personal body, I have low iron issues, so I cook with a cast iron and I eat liver on a regular basis. And he was
I used to
talking
eat
to a
liver pretty
customer,
routinely.
right? He was talking to a customer, and I wish I had the ability to record that. He said, "Don't forget to eat your vegetables. Just because you're buying all this meat doesn't mean you should avoid your vegetables." Like, it was so cute. I was like, "Oh my god, I could clone you." Because you don't hear that.
Yeah.
You don't hear that, right?
No.
And
Especially in the prevalence of keto as a dietary style these days.
well, and this is, I wanted to talk about the commercial food thing. I worked in a chicken processing plant years and years and years ago, and I was not able to eat chicken for about a year. So I wanted to touch on the trauma that people go through in our modern food production process.
Yeah.
And it is real. And I wanted to validate that from my own personal experience. I would never recommend it ever. It's awful. But I do eat chicken. I do try to go as local as I can with it. Um, Mostly because if I tried to get chickens, I think my husband would probably have a hissy fit. Like, he has no interest in going. He's like, I married a hippie, and I admit that, but I can't live the hippie lifestyle. Like, the idea of getting chickens makes him like, nope, 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 nope. He's like, if I'd have wanted a farm, I'd have gotten one. I'm like, but farms are amazing. So there are sacrifices I make in my life, right? But there is a place when we're looking at where our food comes from, the trauma of what the animal incurs in the process. Is that trauma necessary? No, I really don't think it is. And one of the ways, this is a theory and I'm going to throw it out there. What if, as communities, individual communities, learned how to be food independent from each other in a healthy way? how could we change the paradigm of our country to be more community based and people would still have jobs? Like, how many jobs would that create if we had greenhouses that you could work in, if you
Yeah.
could learn how to can, if you could learn how to apprentice under a baker and be a baker or be a meat person or be, I don't know, pick a thing, like kind of how they did it in villages in different parts of the world in history. Like, I think that's a valid structure that we could totally adopt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
There's
it is
there,
traumatizing. I can't understate that at all, not even remotely. That was awful. I don't even want to think about that.
yeah.
Anyway.
And I love that point because that's what I mean, I have a friend who, lives 40 minutes down the road who raises chickens, and so he has eggs. And so if I wanted to, I could go potentially offer him some vegetables and get some eggs or pay him a couple bucks, right? Like we
Right.
can source off of one another as more and more of us choose to break free from the food paradigm that is currently
Yep.
in place. And it's very upsetting because I have seen many instances of people attempting to create this infrastructure for themselves and it being torn down
Hmm.
by local law enforcement or
Yep.
agencies. And so more and more of us need to speak up for our right to have access to healthy food because there's no
Hmm.
reason we shouldn't have access to it, right? There's plenty of
Nope.
land where we could be growing community gardens. There creating victory gardens, creating
Yeah.
fruit trees on the side of the road that people could just pick a fruit. Like, we could do all of these things and so much more, and the earth would flourish for it.
Yes.
And there are tons of people that want to contribute in those ways that are like, I don't want a traditional corporate career, but I like spending time in my garden, right? Like, there's so much that we could do to rebalance this equation, but more and more people need to be aware, right?
Hmm.
Like, I know people that are not even aware to look at the ingredients list on a package and see what's in things, and that if
Oh,
you can't pronounce the words, then maybe you don't want it, right? Outside of like, yes, you can probably get some healthy Greek yogurt that's got bacteria strains in it you can't say, but when it's like all these additives that are just out off the chain, um, we really need to do better. And I'm very there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. There's a lot of vitriolic content on the internet, but the internet also gives us access to a lot of great
yeah.
tools. And I've been
Yeah.
really enjoying lately seeing so many like YouTubers and TikTokers and just like small content creators that will show you how to culture your own yogurt at home.
Yes.
You've gotten some yogurt from the store, how to take stuff that you've bought at the store, like the basil that you get in the plastic wrap that's
Right?
got the roots in it, like
Yes.
how unravel that and plant it in a pot. Like we can,
Microgreens. Microgreens are easy.
yeah.
Easy.
So these are little
Countertop.
things we can start to do
Yeah.
to invite
Yes.
that. To use the Druid term again, the Nuvra is the life force energy that we all have, and plants
Hmm.
and animals have it too. So harvesting as fresh and whole as possible. You know, having that local animal source, that local butcher, that it's not
Yeah.
being transported halfway across the world to get to you and has been sitting in a
Yeah.
freezer, and all of those things. Again, yes, I'm vegetarian, but for me talking about food, I just believe in people having the healthiest food possible for what their body needs. And so I honor that
Right.
every body needs different things. How do you do it as healthy and in
Hmm.
alignment with your energy, with
Yes.
your community's energy, with your family's energy?
Hmm.
Um, I saw a post the other day that was like, the cost of groceries has gone up so high. This is what my family was able to get for $200. And they're angry that this is all they could get for $200. But what was in their haul?
What was in their haul? Yep.
About 4 boxes of cereal, some Mountain
Hmm.
Dew, like the super dye-filled
Yep.
candy, um, packaged, none of it.
It's all packaged.
There
Yeah.
was I think maybe they had milk for the cereal, but it was
Maybe.
probably enriched milk too, like, it probably wasn't
Or
even
2%.
yeah, it probably wasn't even whole milk, and I know from my experience that I could go in with my haul, and even if I was buying meat, like if I were going the Whole Foods direction, I could have had beans, I could have had rice, I could have had 18 different kinds of vegetables, I could have had a
Hmm.
couple of spices, I could have had broth, like all
Hmm.
kinds of other
All
things.
kinds of
But
stuff.
we're not, it's like this the Kellogg's guy who was like, "Oh yeah,
Oh,
costs are going up, so just eat cereal for dinner." And I'm like, "Okay, first of all, this speaks to a much larger problem, but
oh my
second
God.
of all, that's that's not the solution, but many of us think it is because that's all we
So
have
we know.
been taught."
It's all we know. It's all what we've been taught. There's no shame in not knowing. And, you know, one of the things that when I met my
Feminine, I
husband,
can't help it.
I would, he would buy something. I was like, do you even know what's in that? And he'd go, food? It's on the shelf. They're selling it to me. It must be fine. And I'm like, ugh, ugh. I couldn't breathe for a whole 5 minutes. Like it was awful. Um, and speaking of pet food, because I wanted to remember to touch on that,
Oh
which is
yes.
funny. Um, you know, I have cats and you have cats. And one of the things that I have actually watched people not on purpose, genuinely, I think it's a combination of ignorance and disconnection. The different bodies need different things. You said that quite succinctly earlier.
Yep.
Cats are carnivores.
Yes, don't make your cat a vegan, please.
Please, it will hurt them.
Please.
And one of the
Oh my
things
goodness,
that,
Karen.
no, she's fine. One of the things that we actually recently experienced, so we order raw food from a company that makes raw cat food. Okay. Combination of my husband, ease, so I have to please a whole other human being with this, and cats are carnivores, right? So we ran out and we had ordered and it didn't come frozen, so the batch that we got was bad. Well, I'm not going to feed my animal bad meat, right? So we threw it out. So we got another order coming. They replaced it for free. They were a really good company. I'm not bad talking them. But I went to the pet food place and I'm just desperately looking for something that has as little shit in it as I can possibly find. And because I couldn't find that, I went to my butcher and I got some, animal organ pieces and I blended up in the blender and I did my best to kind of do what I could, but it wasn't her food. And she ate it. She's very food motivated. She'll eat anything you put in front of her, whether it's good for her or not. But 2 days later, my husband comes out of the bathroom and he's like, God, what did you feed her? And I went, what do you mean? And he goes, her shit stinks. And I went, shit stinks, my husband. Lovely. Like, shit stinks. And he goes, no, it's like you gave her something awful. And I went, interesting. I was like, you mean you don't really know? Because he's very nose blind. He's really very nose blind. So unless it's very, very potent, he's not going to notice. And he goes, her shit doesn't stink normally. So it's actually a true statement. If you feed your cat raw, real meat, their poop does not have that I have eaten something my body can't actually process smell. And even though I gave her real organ meat, I did give her the cat food stuff, like the filler, to just kind of. And for the week that she ate regular cat food with as much like meat product as I could give her, she was lethargic.
Mm-hmm.
She was cranky. Her poop stank. I mean, that's one very tangible thing, like demonstration. And then every time right after she ate, she'd have the zoomies really bad, and then she would crash, and she would just be limp, and she was really cranky afterwards. So if you think about it, you're giving a carnivore carbs, right? Because even though no matter what I did, I couldn't find a food that didn't have sweet potatoes and other like vegetables. Cats don't need vegetables. Stop giving them vegetables. Dogs can get away with vegetables, but you should probably go back a couple generations and kind of look how wolves eat. Just FYI. So there's like a very interesting paradigm of how we anthropomorphize our animals. Our animal companions have their own entity and their own needs. and we can relate to them, especially our star seeds. But let's not anthropomorphize to the point where we're giving them food that we think that they need because our bodies need it, but theirs don't. And
Bingo.
we would never do that to a gerbil. We would never do that to a sugar glider. Goodness, they kill sugar gliders when you do that. Like, that's awful. Like, we would never do that to our horses. You're not going to offer a horse a raw piece of meat and say, well, that's what you get for dinner. You know, horses eat grains, right? Like, but we do it with our cats and our dogs, our animal companions. And it's just another sideline because I know we've talked about animals in the last couple of weeks, and talking about our animals led us to the discussion of food. And that's like energetically where we get caught up in, I don't believe in the meat industry, which I agree. I don't believe in the modern meat industry. I think it's very toxic. I completely align with you on that as Safrianna. I'm not disagreeing at all. And then we go to the purple Kool-Aid place, the conspiracy place, and we go, well, my cats need to be vegetarian too. And I'm like, oh my goodness, don't kill your
Yeah,
cats.
even when I
Please
was
don't.
stalwart vegetarian or vegan, I would never have imagined forcing my feline companions to do that with me because that's not right for their bodies. And that's why we need to be
I know people who
honoring.
have.
Yeah, I've read a lot of sad stories on the internet about
Mm-hmm.
people who have, and it's really it's heartbreaking because yeah, as Ike just said, it's weird that we make dogs and cats fit our human morals, right? As humans, we like can talk about these things and explore them and break them down, and there's nuance, but yeah, our animal companions are animal companions, and they have their own ways of life. And yeah, like how do we, for the animals that end up in the human food chain, how do we make it more humanitarian and less torture filled and like
Mm-hmm.
again just better for everyone involved because it has
Yes.
this bigger global energy. And that's why you know, part of what we were talking about last night in my Discord server was I brought up my experience in the restaurant industry and
Yes.
how not good that was. And
Mm-mm.
I have a lot of friends who are very passionate about the food industry and you know are either wait staff or are chefs or whatever. And I just want to see food become a more communal experience and like for people who work in the food industry to be able to have good conditions too. Like that's
Yes.
so important, right? And it, again, this ecosystem, it has this ripple effect. So if you're going to out to eat and you're going to a restaurant where the person who owns that restaurant is treating their staff like junk and paying them absolute ass wages, like
Mm-hmm.
what's the actual quality of food that you're eating, even if it tastes fantastic, right? Like how is it impacting you and how are you contributing to your ecosystem in that way?
Yes.
So, and I remember we had a, I'm so sad they closed down. There was this adorable Peruvian, I'm wanting to say,
Mm.
vegan restaurant that came up downtown, and
Ooh.
they had some food-like substances. You know, vegan comfort food almost always does, but
Yeah.
they poured love and care into their food, and it was so good. And like we loved going there because the energy was good, and they put their hearts and souls into it. You could feel that elevated energy with that, and so that's why there's so much nuance, right? You can get away with eating a food-like substance every now and then, especially if you're in a good mood and you're like in good company, you're having a great time,
Yeah.
versus that
100%.
like I am so depressed, I'm shame spiraling and eating this entire gallon of like
Oh,
processed, not even actually ice cream anymore. I love that a lot of the ice creams now, they don't even have milk in them. That's
they
alarming.
don't have actual food in them in any way because they're catering to these hype diets. Like, I think it's Halo Top. I think Halo Top is the one that's like keto friendly.
I think so.
It's icky. It's icky.
I used to eat a
It's
lot of that too, and I would notice like, something feels a little bit off here. But I didn't want to admit that because it tasted good and it was low calorie, right? And that's we need to change this
well,
really.
it's very interesting. I love my husband. He's like, I don't like monk fruit. I don't like stevia because it doesn't taste like real sugar. But then he'll eat one of those weird ingredients only keto paleo bar things, and He's like, but it's got low sugar. And I'm like,
I know my lovely Ike is still watching, and I'm gonna call them out viciously as we start to wind down our conversation. But that's like those are those catchphrases like low sugar, low fat. Ike's is
yeah.
protein, like anything that says protein, they
Uh,
go eat it.
that's
So
my
being
husband. My
aware,
husband does it too. Hmm.
like being aware of these tricks that
Yep. It's
companies
tricks.
use to make things seem healthier than they really
Oh
are, but
yeah, and they're good at it.
over.
Oh.
Read that ingredient label, like what is in it. And if you
Hmm.
not like, oh, I could grow this in my garden if I wanted to. Like that's even my rule for my skincare now. Is like,
Right.
could I grow this in my garden if I had the resources and the time and the effort to grow 5 trillion different things? Then I
Right.
want the product because I could make it myself.
Yes. What's cool about the protein thing is my husband, he knows because I've taught him. He knows how to read the labels. And if he doesn't want to read the ingredients, he'll just go to the little chart on the back that says it's got more protein versus sugar. Like it's his cheat. He cheats it on himself deliberately. And I like, as long as you know that you're trying to trick yourself, I'm not going to say anything. But I don't want you to think you're tricking me too because you're not getting there. We're not. I'm not going to let you try to trick me just because you're tricking yourself. Like
Right.
we don't play those games. And it's funny because he'll. That's a whole other thing. But food is. I think food, because it's one of the key pieces in the wheel. Food in the wheel is the outside circle. It's the outside circle of the medicine wheel. You have body, mind, spirit, emotion, and they relate to things. But that outside wheel is community, and food is what pulls us together. It the irony that I can never get past is that when we eat together, we honor, I mean, we've been taught it from generations and generations, all the way back. All indigenous people do this in one way or another. You thank where the food comes from together in the community as you eat together. That's why families sit down and eat a family meal. Like, you can ascribe to, I don't want to pray over my food because it feels very Christianly triggered. Okay, that's valid. And you can still honor your food. You can honor how you're making it. You can honor when you pick. You can honor when you go to the grocery. I honor stuff I bring from the grocery store. I honor all the things that I put in my body. And I'm constantly seeking new ways of combining things, creating new flavors, adding new foods. There's an interesting study that's fairly recent, and
Well, I was hoping you were going to
it
bring this up. I think I know
I don't know.
exactly what one you're talking
I
about.
don't know where I'm going. I don't know if you know where I'm going, but a very recent study about the gut brain biome. And it scientifically went into what are the components of what makes good gut brain biome. Like, how do you get there? And one of the things that came out of the research was if you eat 30 different kinds of food, I think it's in a week. I think it's a week by week. I think that's
That's
what their
yeah,
criteria
it's
was.
week by week. You try and
Right,
switch and bring stuff.
right. And it's interesting. Like, I did a gut test a couple months ago because I was curious. Like, I've done them off and on over the years because of mast cell activation and all the health problems I've had. The one thing that has never changed in any of, unless I was really, really sick, was that my gut biome is so healthy. And even when I was really sick and on a medication that it's literally something that most people who take this medication, it destroys their gut. It absolutely destroys it.
Antibiotics
And
do,
I
by the way, friends.
antibiotics do too, but I've never had some of the symptoms that most people have from some of these medications that are so destructive. And I couldn't figure it out. I always just thought like, well, I don't know, I'm weird. I've been weird my whole life, so that's just another thing to add weird to. But when I was reading the study, I started like thinking about it, and I asked my husband, I was like, I have a weird question. How many foods do you think that I eat that are different in a month? Because he's the one who does the grocery shopping, right? So I give him my list, and it's always different, right? He goes, "Oh God, you eat like I don't know, 60 different things. It's like, I don't understand it. I don't understand why you have to eat all the different things. And I'm like, hmm,
Hmm.
hmm, hmm. Right?
Very
Like, I grew
interesting.
up eating variety, so I crave it, but my body also craves it. And I've inadvertently created a gut protective atmosphere, basically, a bacterial jungle of difference that when I take things in that are going to make me better, but most of the time it makes people feel worse, I don't have the same symptoms. I don't have the same problems. Doesn't mean I don't have problems.
Right, right.
I got
Yes.
my own problem list, my own problem tree. But when it comes to the gut biome, I have a very healthy gut, and such a healthy gut that every time I do one of those gut tests, they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I just eat food."
Eat real
But
food. Yeah.
it's real food. I do. I pray over my food and I honor in reciprocity where my food comes from. I'm constantly changing. I'm trying new things. Like I've eaten things that some people go, ew, why would you eat that? I'm like, hadn't had it before. I don't
Might
know.
as
I don't
well
like it
try.
unless I try it. Right. But you couldn't catch me ever, ever eating asparagus. It's nasty. I don't like it. Ew.
Meanwhile, our polycule, that's one thing we all agree on. We love asparagus. We have
Love
asparagus
asparagus,
plants
right?
growing out back. So excited to harvest those in 2 to 3 years. That's a
Ooh,
long
right?
haul crop. Oh,
I think it's exciting that the variety of what you can still eat. And when I tell people I don't eat asparagus, they're like, "How do you not eat asparagus? Like
because
that's like
it's
a core green thing to eat." And I went, "I will eat pretty much anything else. Nope, not interested. You right? Like I can still get all that variety and not eat the one thing that I don't like." Right? So like, there's no you can intellectually trick yourself and still fool yourself into bad habits, or you can do that same psychology and heal yourself. You can
yes.
heal your connection to food and you can heal your community connection through food. And the psychology, I'm going to throw this out there, the psychology of Costco, where they give you food, is deliberate because they are creating a community connection through food to get you to buy more things that are not real food but are food like substances. I'm just going to throw that out there. Do not be a Costco purple Kool-Aid person. Just saying.
I've never actually been in a Costco ever, so
It's
I
big
don't
out here.
know what
Oh,
I'm missing or not missing. But
you don't.
anyway, this has been, I hope, very illuminating for people, one way or another, something that maybe you haven't thought of before. But yeah, I'm very, very passionate about food and nutrition and just us fueling our bodies in the most natural, wholesome ways possible. And
Oh
again,
yeah,
that impact piece, I'm always going to talk to the impact, right? That
of
impact
course.
piece is so important because we have a ripple effect, and what we
Hmm.
eat can have a ripple effect, not just
Yes.
inside our bodies, but outside too. So,
Community. It's the community
community
piece.
piece,
You cannot consume food and not impact someone.
right?
Period. You cannot do it. There is no disconnection. You think you are, but you're not. If you
Yeah.
grow stuff in your backyard and you have surplus, take it to the food bank. Find a family that has never eaten fresh zucchini, right? Go next door, walk down the street and go, "Hey, I have an extra zucchini." And somebody may go, "Ew." And I'm like, "Oh, but what about zucchini bread? Would you like that?" And they're like, "Oh,
Oh, zucchini bread, yum.
right,
Which actually, that
right."
reminds me of something fun, which is that we have so much abundance of patty pan that I'm like, I wonder if I could use a
Mmm.
patty pan like a zucchini and make a patty pan bread. This is where when you
Ooh.
have that fresh stuff, you get to experiment and play
Yes.
and surplus.
Right. Absolutely. This is fun. I got gooseberry bushes for the first time, and I love gooseberries. I grew up eating them out of my granddad's yard, and I got gooseberry bushes. And I thought for sure I would not have gooseberries the first year. I've been eating them off the bush as they ripen. Actually, I was eating them before they were ripe because I like the bitter gooseberry too. It's so good. It's so good. And my husband's like, "Gooseberries? What?" And
This
I'm
is where
like,
we're
"All
allowed to like
righty.
different things. We
Yes,
can have different food
I
preferences.
don't like asparagus, and you like asparagus, that's fine, but I'm gonna eat all the gooseberries I want." Like there's so much option. I was out in a walk the other day and I found wild carrot, which is also called Queen Anne's lace, which is also in the family of a poisonous thing. So if you don't know the difference, please do not go seek them out. Like, you need to know your identification.
Have
You will kill
foraging
yourself. Don't do that.
education.
Yeah, please. And I pulled some up and I was just like pulling them up out of the ground. And then I, shook off the dirt and poured a little water from my water bottle. And I was just chomping on them walking down the thing. And this guy who apparently did know that Queen Anne's lace is similar to another thing that could kill you. And he about lost his cookies. He's like, oh my God, you're going to kill yourself. And I went, no, no, I actually do know. This is here, look, Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot, yum, yum, not poison. He goes, oh my God. Like, I swear to God, I almost gave a guy a heart attack. I was like, okay, note to self, don't do this when there's other people on the trail because they don't understand. It's okay.
Oh, you
the things that I encountered. I don't know.
World. Oh, well, again, Ike says they've been illuminated today, and I know we've had a couple people pop in and out. So whether you're catching this live or in the replay, we love you. We see you again. We're so not about shame. We're blame
No
here.
shame.
It's education, it's expansion, it's things we might not have recognized or realized before because, again, we're just trying to create this more positively impactful, healthy world for all, right? And
there's
we don't
so
get that.
much. No, and we don't. And your algorithm is not going to show you if you're not seeking it. So go onto YouTube and type in Victory Gardens. Type in or organic gardening in the city. I think that's how I found one of the YouTube channels I love. Oh my God, she is a riot. She cracks me up. Anyway, there's so much out there that people are exploring, and they're learning from each other and being not ashamed and not afraid to try something new and to challenge the paradigm that, well, we can't break up the farming system the way it is because all the farmers are going to lose their job. Well, actually, it's all the corporations. Like, the small farmers will actually do better, just FYI.
Yeah, the small farmers don't do well under this system.
No, they don't, because they end up getting bought out by the big corporations because they can't survive. So find a local farmer, support them. Like, CSA, I know it sounds weird.
Community shared agriculture.
Yes, there is so much that you can do to stand up for building community through food. And your food then will nourish your body better. You'll feel better. And I'm not saying, going back to like that whole paradigm of, well, to be a modern woman, you have to do all the things, because that is where the psychology really shifted in the United States, and why so many families lost the ability to make bread. They lost the ability to do real food because they were told, well, to be a modern woman, I have to do it the modern way because the old way takes too much time. I'm not going to say things don't take time, but I mean, if I didn't have celiac, I'd still be making fresh bread with my wheat grinder that I hauled around with me for 20-something years. And I was buying a 50-pound bag of red winter wheat really, really cheaply because I live in Montana, right? And I was making fresh bread, fresh flour, fresh things. Like, I very, very rarely ever bought a loaf of bread because it was cheaper to make it at home. So much cheaper. Sourdough, like the sourdough craze from the 2020s, like that, there's a push for that, and there's a real thing about that, right? Like, it doesn't take as much time as you think. And when you teach your children how to cook real food, they eat real food, and it creates community in your family. And you start learning about your kids, and you start learning what's happening, and you start making genuine connections, and you start working on the trauma in the family, and it's a healthy thing, and it's not scary. Food is healing. Food is healing in so many dimensions.
Yep.
You can do this. You can do this.
Yeah, and we're here to support. We are 100%. Here to support.
And no shame. If you can't do it all, don't do it all. Do one thing.
Yeah. Make one little simple swap where you can and see what difference you notice. Get curious, right?
Yeah. Get curious. Don't be afraid. There's nothing in this world to be afraid of. I know people are afraid of, and media and social media tell us all the time, be afraid. Be afraid of this. Be afraid of that. Be afraid of this. Be afraid of that. You can't force me to be afraid, and I'm not gonna. I'm
Well,
not
as a
interested.
natural number 9, I can't help but feel the fear, but we can have a different relationship with it for sure.
And
So,
I can honor that you feel that. I
yeah,
can honor it, and I can tell you as many times as you want me to. There's no need to be afraid.
yeah, we all need that
There's
reminder
nothing to
from
be
time
afraid.
to time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you as always, Red. It is a pleasure. We do not have a next topic lined up, so if you have one you'd
Mm.
really love to hear Red and I talk about, please feel free to reach out in a DM or comment on a post. Let us know what you'd like to see us talk about. We talk about all things inner workings, soul
All of
alignment,
it.
blueprints,
All of
Bible,
it.
getting through the bullshit, right? We talk about it
All of
all.
it.
So,
Let's unwind some of the purple Kool-Aid again. Like I got things. I got things. A whole other thing came up. I'm like, where did that come from?
all right. Well,
Anyway,
maybe we do have a topic for next time, friends, but still,
we'll
reach
see.
out. Let us know what you want us to talk about. We are
Yes.
here and we'll be back in about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.